So, welcome to Clarke Nicklin, everybody. I'm Andrew Baggett, managing partner here. I'm just going to do a quick introduction and then hand you over to the experts, Paul Draper and Scott Herbert. So, welcome to our inheritance tax seminar, which I think is an area we feel that often goes under the radar. It's a tax that has quite significant impacts if planning isn't put in place, but there are plenty of planning opportunities to do with it. So it's a very important area to make sure you're on top of. So I'll let the guys go through the detail very shortly. As we just said, we are on a webinar today for the first time, so we're testing that out. It does actually mean hopefully we'll be able to provide recordings of the webinar afterwards as well as the slides, so we'll be in touch to see if you want those afterwards. In terms of a bit of housekeeping, we aren't due any fire alarms, so if there is if the alarm does go off, the exits are the front door you came in, or fire escape straight through the door behind me here. And in terms of questions, if you can save up your questions, make a note of any questions as you're going through. We've got time for questions at the end, so we'll try and cover off everything we can at the end. So I'll hand you over to Paul, and we'll get going with the seminar. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Right, for those of you who don't know me, that's me. I'm celebrating 32 happy years of professional tax practice, so hopefully by now I know what I'm doing. Scott, who's presenting with me on my right, is also very well qualified. In fact, he's put his qualifications up there. I didn't, because the 25-yard swimming certificate doesn't carry the weight that it used to do. So inheritance tax, that's what we're talking about today. And an interesting fact is it was introduced 35 years ago by the Inheritance Tax Act 1984. And unlike most taxes in that time, it has barely changed. Income tax and capital gains tax have changed endlessly. We've had so many different changes, I couldn't list them out. But IHT has basically not changed. The structure, how it works, even the rate has stayed the same. And basically the changes which have been made, like the introduction of the residence nil rate band a couple of years ago, have been positive changes. The best thing about inheritance tax is it's the easiest tax to plan for. It's a pretty benign tax. Income tax is the hardest tax to deal with. Inheritance tax, by comparison, is still easy to plan for, because there's a lot of reliefs, a lot of exemptions, and a lot of things that you can do which make it easy, or relatively easy, to reduce your liability. But we're concerned that this nice regime, this nice system is going to change. And why might it change? Well, a Brexit budget is one good reason. The second reason is that the government has instructed the Office of Tax Simplification, that is an oxymoron, the Office of Tax Simplification, the OTS, have been instructed to review inheritance tax, and their first report was published in November. And as I'm sure you will appreciate, when governments review things to change things, they generally don't make things better, they make things worse. And inheritance tax at the moment only accounts for a very tiny proportion of all government revenue. It's less than 1%. So it affects relatively few taxpayers. So that's another reason why it's an easy tax to change. So if you look at the Brexit budget, if you cast your minds back to November, we had a lovely budget. It was all nice and pleasant. There was tax reliefs and personal allowances going up. There's no unpleasantness at all. But Philip Hannon did say if Brexit got tricky, he'd be back with another budget. And that won't be a nice budget, because that will be a revenue raising budget. And inheritance tax is an easy one for the government to go at. If you're a politician, you're not going to start attacking the hard-working families that we keep hearing about. So if the Chancellor wants to raise some additional revenue, inheritance tax is a fairly easy one to go for. If there are changes, they could be introduced quite soon after Brexit. It's not going to come in on the 30th of March if we do in fact exit on the 29th. But I think sometime this year we could well see some changes coming in. The OTS report that I mentioned is the first of two reports, and not that you're going to read it, but it's quite a weighty document.
It's actually popping on the table, hasn't
It has. Stopping it wobbling. The first report really is setting out what they see as the key issues to look at. And the main points, a couple of those aren't too exciting. The first one I want to pick up on is the residence nil rate band. We're going to come on to the residence nil rate band shortly. It was a nice relief that was introduced a couple of years ago. You're all familiar with the nil rate band. Everybody has a nil rate band of £325,000 a year, which you can have before you pay inheritance tax. On top of that, if you have a family home that you live in, and if you choose to leave that property to your children or your grandchildren, so sort of what's called closely inherited, you get an additional nil rate band. Now it's being phased in, but by 2020, it's worth another £175,000 each. So for a couple, very soon you'll have £1 million of nil rate band. So you've got £1 million of wealth before you pay inheritance tax. But the relief is very complicated and it's been criticised for being complicated. So hopefully it'll get simplified and it won't get abolished. The big one is the one hopefully you can see in bold. Lifetime gifts have attracted criticism, and the quote from the report is, "Wealthy people who are well advised can give away their assets and pay less IHT." Well, that's always been the case since the tax was introduced in 1984. And going back to what I said about IHT being an easy tax to plan for, one of the main reasons for that is because you can just give away your wealth. It's easy to do. There are a number of reliefs and exemptions, and the general scheme of things makes it easy. But that could be one of the main changes. The ability to just make gifts could be curtailed in some way. And the final point, business property relief. If you have a trading business, a company, or a trading business and not an investment business, once you've held it for 2 years, you qualify for BPR. And BPR is very generous. It basically says it doesn't matter what the value of your business is, but for IHT purposes, it has a nil value. So it's very generous. It is a little complicated in some respects, and there are some anomalies. And it's an area that the OTS have listed for review and simplification. And hopefully, simplification doesn't mean abolition. So what are we going to be talking about today? Well, quite simply, all we're going to talk about is doing things that make sense, things that you're happy to do, and do it while the rules are still benign and as they are now. We're not talking about doing anything that you may regret later. If you sort of rush ahead and do something in anticipation of the rules changing, it could be something that you later think we shouldn't have done that. So if you distill those 2 points down, what we've always said to clients when it comes to inheritance tax planning is, if you do something, do it because you're happy to do it, it makes sense. Don't do it just for the purposes of saving tax. If you get the tax saving, that's the icing on the cake. But if you give away £1 that you need in the hope of saving your beneficiaries 40p sometime down in the future, but you need that £1, that's not a good outcome. So only do something if it makes sense. And that goes through everything that we're going to talk about today. Everybody is different as well. Your own particular family circumstances, your own view of life, your own wishes for what happens to your family will all be different. So Scott and I are not here to stand up and say you should do this or you should do that. What we're here to do is to point out opportunities, things that you should be thinking about, and then you can decide what's appropriate for your family. And we're talking about lifetime planning. We're not talking about wills. Everybody should have a proper will in place. But your will doesn't really save inheritance tax. It can do, but generally all your will does is make certain that on your death, your estate is dealt with as you wish. So your assets go where you want them to go, your beneficiaries are looked after, and so on. But the will itself generally will not save a penny of inheritance tax. If you want to save inheritance tax, it's all about doing something now during your life. And typically, that's giving assets away to reduce the size of your estate, or looking at some financial products of the kind that Scott's going to talk about. And really, the aim is to get you thinking. The problem with inheritance tax is that we're all busy. We've all got things going on in our lives. There's issues that we have to deal with. And it's so easy just to put it on the back burner and leave it and come back to it later. I once went on a course which was run by a very eminent tax barrister, and he said to us all, hands up all those planning on not dying. It's going to come, so you need to plan for it. And at the moment, the regime, the tax system is favourable. So our suggestion is get thinking about it and hopefully get doing something about it. So the two main areas to consider, I'm going to start off looking at gifts to children, gifts to family, and so on. And I'm going to hand over to Scott, and he's going to do the difficult bit, looking at pensions and financial products, etc. So gifts. This is the main tool that we've got at the moment to reduce the inheritance tax liability. The way IHT works, very simply, is that when you die, you add up all your assets, you knock off your liabilities, you then knock off the nil rate band that I've mentioned, and anything that exceeds the nil rate band, you pay tax at 40%. It generally only comes into play on what we call the second death. So if you have a married couple, it's when the second person passes on, that's when the IHT bites. But the easy way at the moment to reduce that liability is to make gifts during your life, to give away some of your wealth, to give away some of your capital. And the most common one is what's called the PET, or potentially exempt transfer. And this is the thing you always read about in the Sunday Times, where you make a gift to your children or to another individual, a family member or whatever. And if you survive that gift by 7 years, that wealth is outside of your estate for inheritance tax purposes. If you die within 3 years, the gift is ineffective. You're no worse off, but you've not achieved anything. And then between 3 years and 7 years, you have a tapering relief that tapers away the rate of tax down to 0 by year 7. There's no limit on how much you can give away. You can give away £10 million, it doesn't matter. But you have to be careful about the type of asset that you're giving away. Cash is very easy to deal with. You can just give cash away, and that's easy. But say you had a property and you wanted to give that away. The first thing you've got to check out with property is if the property is worth more now than you paid for it, the property is standing at a gain. And even if you give the property away to your children or grandchildren or whatever, you're still concerned about capital gains tax, because capital gains tax applies on gifts. And by making a gift, you can trigger a capital gains tax charge of up to 28%. So I'm not saying you wouldn't do that, but you need to understand it before you go ahead making gifts. And the basic idea is to reduce the size of your estate. And if you give away £1, in theory, you'll save 40p of inheritance tax for your beneficiaries at some point in the future. But really, all we're ever talking about is giving away your surplus wealth. So what I've just been saying about only do what makes good sense and you're happy to do, this is the key to it. you only give away what you can afford to give away, because what you cannot do is make a gift and then arrange to have the money back, or arrange to have the assets back. Because if you have some sort of arrangement like that, where, you know, if times are tough, you can get the money back again, that's what's called a gift with reservation of benefit. And for tax purposes, HMRC can say the gift hasn't happened. You're no worse off, but you're just back to where you started. The gift is ineffective. So really what you're talking about is you've got some money and you're happy to give it away and not see it again. If you're not certain, you give away what you're happy to give away at the moment, then come back in a year's time, review it again, make another gift. And each time you make a gift, this 7-year clock starts to tick. Very often with families, when you sit down with clients, one of the issues is they're not happy to give away large amounts of capital to children. They're concerned that they could get divorced, it could have issues with business or family matters, they could just be poor at managing money. There's all sorts of reasons why you might not want to give your children money. Scott is going to cover trusts in more detail later on, but I'm not going to go into that now. The only thing I'm going to mention is that with trusts, there is a limit on how much you can ordinarily put into a trust. And from March 2006, the rule is you can put in up to a nil rate band, so that's £325,000 each, before you start to pay the lifetime inheritance tax charge of 20%. But when you get into it, very often you can put in more than you might think because of the way that £325,000 is calculated. I mentioned business property relief. So if you have a trading company or a business and you qualify for BPR, you can make a gift and you don't need to worry about the 7-year rule. Straight away, the asset is out of your estate, there's no IHT charge, and there's no issues if you were to die within 7 years. There is potentially a clawback in certain situations, but for most people it's not a concern. So giving away shares in a family company is generally easy to do. And we can also deal with the capital gains tax position if we're giving away shares. The other reason why you may want to make gifts is to maximise the residence nil rate band that I mentioned. And the next slide is going to cover an example on that. And then finally, I'm going to look at family investment companies, or FICs, which are quite topical at the moment. Some of you may have heard about them or read about them. They're quite popular, so we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at that. So we're looking now at the residence nil rate bands, and if you can remember, if you're a couple, you have 2 lots of £175,000 of relief. Well, you will have in April 2020 because the relief is being phased in. But you'll have 2 lots of £350,000 of relief, which in addition to normal nil rate band will give you £1 million of tax-free capital. But when the rules were introduced, what the government said is if your estate is worth more than £2 million, the residence nil rate band is scaled back at the rate of £1 for every £2 that your estate is over £2 million. So by the time you get to an estate of £2.7 million, all of your residence nil rate band has disappeared. So if we look at Mr. and Mrs. Franklin, they have an estate worth £3 million in total. Not uncommon these days, that's not an extraordinary estate by any means. But they have an estate of £3 million. And because their estate is worth more than £2.7 million, as things stand, they lose the entirety of the residence nil rate band. So what they do is they decide over time to make a series of gifts to their children, grandchildren, or whoever. And over time, they reduce the size of their estate to £2 million. So hopefully they take the view, we've still got plenty of money left, £2 million is plenty to live on. But by getting their estate down to 2 million, they no longer have the residence nil rate band clawed back. So they get it in full, and the tax saving, 40% of the 350,000, it's £140,000 saving. Now you might say, well, there's no way I give away £1 million out of the £3 million estate. So I go back to what I said earlier on. Everybody's different. It's about what you want to do. All we can do is point out the opportunities and the type of planning that you can do. It's up to you to decide what you're happy and comfortable to do. Family investment companies. These are really not a new idea. They've been around for quite a long time, but people are starting to push them more, use them more, and they're getting talked about more. And every family investment company is different because everybody's family is different and so on. But the basic features are very, very similar. In common sense terms, they're probably only practical if you have, say, £500,000 to put into a FIC, just because of the running costs and the logistics of doing it. It could work for lower sums, but generally you've got to put a reasonable amount in to make the thing worth the effort. And basically what you do is you have a situation where you have the parents and they fund a company for the family. And that company is a wrapper, if you like, for the investments. So once the cash is in the company can go along and invest the money and invest it in whatever it likes. So you could go and buy property, buy-to-lets, commercial property. You could go to see Scott and say, we'd like to put money in stocks, shares, bonds, whatever. So the capital is invested within the company. And the basic scheme of it is that the wrapper, the company, is the way we manage the parents' inheritance tax position. And we can also give them some income tax savings. So if we just talk through how it actually works, hopefully it'll start to become clear. So the typical scheme of things is mum and dad have some cash and they put the cash into a new company that they set up for the family. And usually that money goes in by way of a loan. It can go in for preference shares, but loan is usually the easiest way to deal with it. So they put the cash into the company. Now, mum and dad will have some shares in this company, some equity shares, some ordinary shares, and those shares will give them voting control. So the key point is mum and dad control the company, and therefore they control the capital in the company. So if the children get divorced, go off the rails or whatever, that doesn't matter. Mum and dad control the company and the assets are in the company. Now, mum and dad's shares will have very, very limited rights to capital. So if the company was sold or if the company was liquidated, mum and dad get very, very little back. And therefore their shares are worth very, very little. When you die, for inheritance tax purposes, as I've said, you tot up the value of all your assets, knock off your liabilities. What you actually do is you put in the market value of all of the assets at the date of your death, what's called probate value. And the market value of shares with very limited capital rights is very, very small indeed. So in mum and dad's estate, all they have is the loan. It's an asset, it's the money that the company owes them, but the shares are worth very little. So as the company runs and it makes investments and it makes some profit, it could pay a dividend out of the shares to all the family members, the children, maybe grandchildren, as well as mum and dad. But typically, you don't want to pay your dividend back to mum and dad, because all you're doing is you're passing wealth and money back to them. Not only that, mum and dad are probably going to be paying tax at a higher rate than the children or the grandchildren. You might be basic rate taxpayers or paying no tax at all, in which case they could get a very tax efficient use of those dividends. Don't forget, if you do pay dividends to minor children, minor means less than 18 years old, those dividends are always going to get taxed back on mum and dad. That's always the rule. So the value of the loan doesn't really change over time. That's a fixed amount, and that'll always be in mum and dad's estate. But as the company grows in value, as it invests, the growth in value really accrues to the shares held by the children. So that growth and value is in their estates, not in mum and dad's estates. So it's a technique called value freezing. So if mum and dad put £500,000 into the company and it becomes worth £5 million, they still only have a £500,000 interest in it, really. All that other wealth has gone to the kids. The next bit of good news is that the company, like all companies, pays corporation tax at 19% on its profits. And that's scheduled to go down to 17% in 2020, Brexit permitting. So if the company invests money, it's only paying tax at 17%. So you've got 17% tax choking off the investment growth. If mum and dad invested that money, they'd have 40 to 45% tax choking off that investment growth. And if you think about a pension pays no tax. So the pension fund grows tax-free. So a FIC actually stands somewhere in the middle between sort of 0 and 40-45% as terms of the rate of tax it pays. And you've got flexibility as to what you do with the company. You control it. You're not subject to any external rules on pensions or whatever. If mum and dad wanted it, they could get their cash back. They could have their loan repaid. So if there was liquidity in the company, they could get their cash back if times were tough and they needed that money back. So that's a good feature. And at some point in time, you might say, well, actually, the company's run its course, we're going to liquidate it. We want our money out. And as things stand at the moment, if you liquidated the company, you'd only pay 20% capital gains tax. With a trading company, you pay 10% capital gains tax with entrepreneurs relief. But because this is an investment company, we pay 20% to get our money out of the company. But that's still pretty good. If you think of income tax at 40-45%, maybe even higher in the future, that's a good rate of tax. On a practical note, it is a company. It needs annual accounts. You will have to file those accounts at Companies House, so there's a bit of visibility, but nothing that should worry anybody. So that's a quick run through FIX. I'm sure you've heard enough of me by now, so I'm going to hand over to Scott.
Thank you, Paul. Good morning, everybody. Just get some of the dry stuff out of the way here. My name's Scott Herbert. I'm an independent financial advisor. Clarke Nicklin Financial Planning, we're authorised and regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority directly down at Canary Wharf in London to give you independent advice. I'm going to talk about various different options which are available for you and potential opportunities and solutions. And just a little risk warning there, if we do look at investments for you, stock market linked, we look at BPR solutions, AIM listed stocks and shares, for example, values can go up, they can go down. So just a little warning there, but obviously we can discuss things more on sort of a one-to-one basis. Now, what I want to look at is really untangling inheritance tax. A lot of people bury their head in the sand. I see a lot of people doing this on a daily basis. So what I want to look at are planning opportunities and at this stage considerations for you. The first thing I want to look at with you is leaving pensions as part of your estate. There has been changes to pensions a number of years ago with flexibility rules, death benefits, etc. Making gifts to reduce the value of your estate. Equity release schemes, how could they help you? Setting up a suitable trust, different styles of trust, again, only a whistle stop at this point. Taking out a life insurance policy to cover your inheritance tax liability. I'm going to look at investments in business property relief investments, BPR, into qualifying companies, how would they help you? And inheritance tax-free ISAs, individual savings accounts. So what I want to do first of all is looking at leaving potentially part of your pension as part of your estate. And what we did have back in 2014 were changes to the inheritance tax on pensions. Generally what we have are two types of pension scheme. Now this is outside of the state pension, of course. We have defined benefit schemes, maybe schemes that you may have been in many, many years ago, final salary schemes. Then the other type of pension scheme we have are personal schemes, maybe from the workplace, personal pensions, self-invested pensions, etc. So we need to look at the two different types of pensions that you may have. So if we look first of all at a DB scheme, a defined benefit scheme, final salary pension, those are pensions that generally provide you with a fixed level of income guaranteed for life. It may very well be index linked. Now, what's going to happen with this type of scheme, if you're drawing benefits, there's going to be a level of income generally to your spouse that would be made available. Generally, that might be about half of the value of the pension. You've got a 20 grand pension, your spouse would generally get about 10 grand. The only problem with those types of schemes is if both of you go under the proverbial wheels of the bus, there is nothing left to pass down to your loved ones. Now, we are getting asked for a lot of advice on a regular basis. I've got a defined benefit scheme, final salary scheme. The income's £20,000. My transfer value's £700,000. What should I do? So all this is going on behind the scenes at the moment. Don't get me wrong. If you want guaranteed income, it's going to be best to stick with your defined benefit scheme for sure. But these are considerations. The main difference is with if you have your own pension scheme, a money purchase arrangement, a personal pension, a SIP. The rules are at the moment is that the first 25% of the pot can be taken completely tax-free as long as you take it before the age of 75. What's actually happened since 2014, there has been changes to pension legislation. Now, what previously would have happened is at the age of 75, you used to have your arm up your back to purchase the good old annuity. So you're giving the money to the Prudential or to Aviva. If you die, there might be a spouse's pension, it's gone. You don't need to do that anymore. It's no longer compulsory. What a lot of clients do, if they want more flexible rules with the pension scheme and they want to pass it down, they go into something called drawdown, pension drawdown. What this gives you the ability to do is, yes, you could spend all the money in your natural lifetime if you want, because it's flexible to do that, or you can pass down to your family. So the way it's going to work actually is on the undrawn element of your pension, there are two sides to it. If you die before the age of 75, if you've got £500,000 in your pension scheme, that goes to your estate. That goes to your family in a lump sum, no tax. If you die after the age of 75, there is tax on the pension scheme, the residual amount which is left over. Now, the way in which this can work is a lot of people might just naturally think, well, I'll pass it to my husband, I'll pass it to my wife. What we are finding at the moment is a lot of people are leaving a residual amount in the pension scheme. It can pass to husband, it can pass to wife, it can pass to children, it can pass to grandchildren. So we've got individuals who have made nominations, for example, for their grandchildren, that they would receive £11,850 a year if it were this year. That would be completely tax-free because children have a nil rate tax band. You can pass it down to your children as well, who may be in a lower tax band. So there's quite a few planning opportunities for anybody who has a pension scheme and you don't think you're going to exhaust it. So that is very popular. So again, not necessarily have to pass just to spouse, it can go to children, you could bypass it to grandchildren, university fees, all these sort of things, private schooling fees, etc. Now, just a quick one for you here. According to unbiased.co.uk, inheritance tax is the second most resented tax amongst the British public. Now, I've got a very expensive bottle of white wine for who could possibly guess what the most unpopular tax is in Britain at the moment. It's Pinot Grigio, Stuart, come on. Anybody any ideas? I'll take a guess. I'll be taking the wine home with me.
Capital gains? Something weird like national insurance. Bedroom tax.
You're getting closer. I'll be drinking that later. Council charge, council tax. So I thought it was interesting. I thought it might be an income tax actually. So this is quite a big area really. So it's, again here is just fairly simple at this stage, just to give you a little bit of an overview. So you can make gifts to reduce your estate. And simply, as Paul's saying there, is what you're going to do is to give some money away, but you've got to be careful of the sort of pitfalls with this. First of all, gifts in between spouses or civil partners are exempt from inheritance tax. If you want to give it to your wife, your husband, you're fine with that. What you also have here are just little tidbits here. HMRC provides you with an annual gifting allowance of £3,000. So if you want to give £3,000 away, you're okay to do that. If you haven't done it 1 year, you can roll it over another year. You could give £6,000 away. These are just the little ones here. If you want to make some small gifts, you can make £250 and you can make virtually as many of those as you wish. That's fine. If you've got children, grandchildren, anybody else getting married, which we see a lot of people do, you can, for your child, £5,000 towards a wedding, £2,500 for grandchildren. And if anybody else is getting married who you know, family, friends, etc., you could make a gift of £1,000, which would then be exempt for inheritance tax. What you can also do is to help with inheritance tax, you can make gifts to charities, national museums, national trusts, and political parties. So obviously we see people making gifts to charities. There is the IHT side of it that is then exempt. And as Paul said there again, is other gifts are going to be subject to inheritance tax, partially exempt transfers, pets. Now, the first thing that we always recommend that you do, and I know individuals in here are already doing this, is to keep a record of any gifts that you make, because that's certainly going to make it a little bit easier when you've gone, when your executor is looking at the work, trying to wind things up. Generally, an executor has to look at gifts over a 14-year period. So you could be making small gifts, large gifts. So always keep a record of that on the file. It can be very difficult to unpick over that period of time. Just looking at other opportunities in this is a little bit left field actually, is looking at equity release schemes. What we have are, particularly with house prices over so the last 10-15 years, we find a lot of individuals have got a lot of their estate locked in residential property. So, for example, you've got £1 million home, you've got a few £100,000 in cash. The only problem is with that, that makes it very, very difficult for you to do any planning. Because how are you going to get money out of the property? It's locked in the property. And as Paul said before, you might be taxed over anything at 625 grand or £1 million. So what you can do to try and reduce the value of your estate, it might help you in your lifetime, it could make you make a gift. You could consider an equity release scheme. The way in which that would work is you actually take a percentage of the value of your property out of the property. You're going to take a loan against it. So let's say, for example, you need to get your inheritance tax to £1 million, your overall estate, you've got £1 million property, £200,000 cash. You might want to take £200,000 out. You could make that as a gift. What you're doing here effectively is putting a debt on your estate. So that could give you the ability to pass that wealth over, and I'll look at the other solutions, why you might want to do that and how that gift might look as well. What we'd always recommend that you do with any equity release is to see a specialist who specialises equity release. Not all advisors can do that. So setting up trusts, if you want to set, there's lots of different styles of trusts, can do different things for you. Trusts are not a new thing. They've been around for several hundred years. Now, what trust can be, the idea of trusts are that you can pass assets to beneficiaries, children, in a timely and controlled manner. Often people are trying to set up trusts to pass assets through the generation, through your family, to children, to grandchildren is very typical. The biggest advantage with trusts is that you can set them up in the manner that you want to set them up as the trustee. You're going to call the shots on what's going on with this trust. What age could the children get it? Do they want income? Is it capital? Etc., etc., etc. There are many different types of trusts. Now, what I want to do here, without getting too sort of dry on things, is so what you can do, for example, it's quite endless. You might want to set a trust up for your children or your grandchildren, and you may say, I want them to put this money aside I want them to have access to the money when I die. I want them to have access for the money when they achieve the age of 25. So you've got control of that. What you also have, there are different types of trusts. You can have, again, I don't want to get too complicated here, you can have trusts that are set in stone. I want my daughter Jean to get X amount. The only problem is with that, if your daughter then meets a husband who you don't like, tough. You've made the gift, absolute. What's very popular is to make a gift that's discretionary, in that there may be a classification of individual family members, children, grandchildren, whatever it would be. You keep it open. So if you have a grandchild who gets to the age of 18, who you may have said, I'm going to give it to John, and it's discretionary, and he wants to go out riding motorbikes, he's not going to do that. You as trustees will have control whether he gets that money or not. So other types of trusts as well that we get involved with are things that, for example, that you may want a relationship with the capital. The relationship that you may very want with the capital that you gift away is a level of income moving forwards. You can do that. Our clients do this. So what you could do, say, for example, I've got £500,000 here. I'm not going to need that £500,000 in my lifetime. However, I need an income. I need an income. I can't just give £500,000 away and that is it. You can arrange an income. This is called a discounted gift trust. There are loan trusts. You can loan the money out of your estate, £500,000. That goes outside your estate. You can recall the money back in the loan. The £500,000 grows to £750,000 over 10 years. The £250,000 growth is outside the estate, just the growth. So there are lots of different styles of trusts to suit your circumstances. It looks at control, flexibility. Do you need income? So again, trusts are tailored to your personal requirements, as Paul said before. This is getting fairly simple, actually. You've got a £2 million estate. Let's say just crudely, inheritance tax is on the second million. Your inheritance tax is £400,000. If you're in reasonable health, you can insure the difference. You can insure yourself for £400,000 on a whole of life policy, which is assurance. So even if you live to 97, you're still insured. You can do that. Premiums are expensive. You've got to be in reasonable health to do that. The other type of insurance is a term policy. What we have are individuals who might make a gift. £500,000 is made as a gift. There's a potential inheritance tax liability of £200,000. Tapering down, as Paul said, over 7 years. You can take a life insurance policy to protect that £200,000 liability for your beneficiaries. There's lots of different things that you can do. The way in that's going to work, the thing is we've got to be realistic about this, is by taking out an insurance policy, you're not reducing the tax liability at all. You're just going to use the life insurance policy to pay. You'll still get the tax bill, but you're going to have to pay the insurance premiums, which could be quite expensive to do that as well. And what we'd always say is if you're going to do that, where we've got to be really, really careful. I've had individuals come and said, Scott, we've sorted all the life cover in relation to the inheritance tax. Oh, fabulous. Is it under a trust? What? What do you mean, is it under a trust? No, it's not under a trust, Scott. Well, that's not very good. If it's not under a trust, the life insurance policy, that will also be included in your estate as well. So if there's any life insurance that's taken out, it has to have a trust arrangement around it to make sure the life cover will pay outside your estate. Seen that on a number of occasions. Real schoolboy error. And shop around. Go to an independent advisor. Make sure you're getting the best deal for you. Now, as Paul said before, this is slightly different now, just looking at business property relief qualifying companies. So what you can do, we've got clients doing this at the moment. Business property relief, as Paul said, they've been around for quite a number of years. And the whole idea of it is that you invest into investments that qualify for business property relief. If you've got your company at the moment or certain style of trading company, you're going to be exempt potentially for business property relief. So what you can do is broadly similar with an investment style. There's lots of different types of portfolios that we can invest into, is invest into either some sort of BPR solution or an AIM listed stock portfolio in UK stocks and shares. Now, certainly what we've got to look at, there has to be, we can't have the tax tail wagging the investment dog here. We need a good quality portfolio of stocks and shares for you to invest into. So there has to be an appetite for a level of risk with this in order to compensate for the tax incentives. So the whole idea with the BPR solutions are it's quicker to get your money outside your estate, and we'll go on to that in a moment. This is quite nice, greater access, control and simplicity for you as the individual making a potential investment. And we advise on all the different sort of styles of portfolios. So what we have on the BPR side is you can get the money outside your estate within 2 years. And remember, these are only potentially part of your solution. You could be doing several different things. You can get the money if it's in, we need to make sure it's targeted at BPR qualifying companies. We can get the money outside the estate within 2 years. Now, I've just had a very interesting referral from a law firm. They have a lady aged 80 years of age. I shan't mention any names. This individual has lost capacity to act via, there's now a power of attorney on behalf of mother, son. She's invested into a unquoted private company for 30 odd years. The first opportunity in 34 years has just come around that she needs to sell the shares in the company, and this is a significant amount of money. Well, that's great. Son was pleased. We're going to get a lot of money. This is a big figure. And what we will do, he's saying to me, we'll make gifts to me with power of attorney. Well, no, you won't, because mum's lost the ability to act. He's got the power of attorney, can't make a gift. I'll put it into trust. You can't put money in trust. What are we doing? BPR solutions. The money is coming out of an unquoted company, been in there for 34 years. One single company is going into 30 unquoted companies on the UK AIM market. What is the benefit of that? We have got the full amount out of the potential inheritance tax liability on day one. With business property relief, if you already have business property relief on a qualifying asset, you have 3 years to roll it over. So suddenly he was looking at a huge tax bill that has been eradicated on day one. So they do have their place. He understands. She was already in one unquoted company. It's never paid a dividend in 34 years, this company. So yes, it is risky. We're going from one unquoted companies to 30 unquoted companies. It has saved him and the estate significant amounts of money. It's not right for everybody. You have to have the right attitude to risk, etc., etc. So I think again there, if you want to consider the business property relief investments, yeah, your capital's at risk. The value will go up and down. You might not get what you've invested. There's been quite a bit of volatility in the markets, particularly over the last 3 months, downwards and upwards, to be fair. BPR portfolios will depend upon the performance of the companies. So with one of the portfolios, it's invested into, what's it called, patisserie, Valerie Patisserie, which has had problems. So on one of the portfolios, it's actually got reasonable liquidity on 28 holdings, just with a couple that you can't get your money out. Remember, with the BPR solution, you want to go and have your world cruise, and you're 82 years of age, and I want £50,000, we're going first class, outside cabin. You can get 50,000 quid out of this thing. You can't if you've made a gift. It's a different solution. Tax rules might change, as Paul said. You know, that's always going to be a risk there. And shares can be volatile, and they can be certainly less liquid, or reasonably less liquid within an AIM BPR portfolio. Where you can be really careful actually is go, oh, well, we'll go to the AIM market, it's absolutely fine. Yeah, you can make sure that you get your BPR relief on it. No stocks, and there's got to be different types of traded stocks and shares. You can't go to land, you can't go to buildings. So it can be reasonably complicated. Again, get some good advice. If there's something you've got to look at the risks, look at what you're investing into. One thing I like to look at, and particularly with the BPR solutions, the AIM listed portfolios, is liquidity. So if you make a cash call and you want your cash back, historically, how long has it taken to get your cash back? There's some where it can take some time, I can assure you, and there are others where it doesn't. The other side of things that actually gets overlooked are the good old ISAs. A number of years ago, the HMRC permitted inheritance tax ISAs. So what you can do with your ISA allowance, we've got many clients who have built up ISAs over many years, PEPs, ISAs, etc. So what you do have the ability to do is, the only problem is the sting in the tail, if they could just put on there, is with ISAs. Oh, it's tax-free, isn't it? They'll go like, no, it won't. That will get rolled up as part of your estate. If it's in an inheritance tax-friendly ISA, which you can do, £20,000 a year, there's two of you, £40,000 a year. You can actually do transfers in with accumulated ISAs from earlier years. You can go into it as well. We can get the money outside your estate in those in 2 qualifying years. So again, that can help. With the beauty of it as well, you say, well, hang on a minute, it's in there again. Unlike a gift, is you can get access to it. If you want to go and change the car, you need another £20,000 to upgrade it. We can get it out subject to liquidity, which you can't do with a trust. Or if you've given the money away, you can't do that. So again there, I think just what I was saying there, to be very fair, shares in companies listed on the AIM market tend to be more volatile, which means is they can go up and down more on a daily basis, and the higher risk than, let's say, a mainstream stock and shares ISA. The value of your portfolio will depend on the companies clearly that you've invested into. You might not get back your capital that you put in. And again, there we work with some of the leading BPR solutions in the UK. We're completely independent with the advice that we give to all our clients. I just really wanted to leave you with that there. Benjamin Franklin, we've all heard that one, forget about it. Nothing can be certain in this world other than death and taxes.